Welcome back to the B.Block, our second section of this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast news. I'm Alaina Pinto. Minnesota's medical cannabis program has been growing since its inception in 2014, and in 2023, the legislature there paved the way to open its adult use market. Still, 2 years later, Minnesota has not issued one license, but that might be changing now. Advocates now have a Supreme Court decision behind them that could allow licenses to be issued as soon as the summer. An administrative judge ruled that the market is ready and licenses will start to be issued in July. Those licenses are for social equity applicants who are in state and others who took part in a lottery. This is the final step before sales can begin before the year is out. But now let's check out what's going on in the international markets of Europe with Ben Stevens and Debi Facey in Canada.
I'm Ben Stevens with Business of Cannabis with this week's report from Europe for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Now, as I'm sure you've noticed, it's been a frenetic week of news across the world, and the European cannabis industry has managed to match this pace. So here's my very brief overview of what's been happening over the last couple of weeks. In Italy, the Meloni government has used emergency measures to push through a controversial ban on hemp flower and all its associated products. This means that as soon as the decree is published in the official gazette, expected to happen over the next couple of days, some 22,000 hemp industry workers will be criminalised overnight, in a move that will decimate an industry expected to be worth around €2 billion to the Italian economy. There is still hope the Italian Parliament or the European Commission will step in to block this flagrant violation of international law. To Germany, where this week it was announced the anti-cannabis CDU-CSU has finally agreed to form a coalition with the SPD, following weeks of negotiations. Despite a lengthy policy announcement, there was just one mention of the future of the country's cannabis reforms, which will now see an open-ended review this autumn, though it's worth noting that this review is already due to take place. As such, the industry is really none the wiser on whether the new government will amend existing cannabis regulations. In Malta, which decriminalised adult use consumption in 2021, the government has proposed new measures set to clamp down on its non-profit cannabis clubs. It now wants to shift offences committed by these clubs from administrative tribunals to magistrates' courts, effectively treating them as criminal matters. It also wants to remove a clause which allows members of these clubs to remain anonymous, which advocates believe will force people back to the black market. Meanwhile, in the Netherlands, the ongoing coffee shop pilot has reached its final stage, and all participating retailers must now only sell cannabis procured from licensed growers, breaking a framework that's been in place for decades. However, due to ongoing supply chain issues, they will still be permitted to sell hash from the black market for another 2 months. Finally, in the Czech Republic, a new decree has come into force allowing general practitioners, instead of just specialists, to apply for licenses to prescribe medical cannabis, though only for chronic pain. This ends years of bottlenecks that have left just 200 doctors prescribing nationwide until this point. Uptake may still be slow, with many GPs still cautious of cannabis and education lacking pretty far behind the rest of the continent. That's all for me this week. I'm Ben Stevens with Business of Cannabis, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
This is Debi Facey with the Canadian Cannabis Coast to Coast News Report. So what we have in Canada this week is Winnipeg has launched a campaign in order to survey and create stats when it comes to impaired drivers. They are aiming towards actual consumers leaving dispensaries, which is a very different way of doing it. They had found that between January to March 2025, they had cited over 207 tickets. They had found 97 people impaired, and they had also just overall did 327 pullovers in order to see whether or not people were just driving impaired in general. For those kind of stats to come out, especially within such a short period of time of 3 months, is startling due to the fact that we haven't been doing those kind of surveys throughout the whole entire 5 years. So, with that being said, we all know that driving impaired is illegal. It is not something that's safe to do. 2, we should always keep in mind that keeping a good time around, I want to say, 8 to 12 hours after consumption. You should be safe enough to be able to drive, but at the same time, that is up to your discretion, especially after the 12-hour mark. And third, there's other people on the road. We have to keep that in mind, not just because of the fact that we think that we're high and fine, but everyone else doesn't know that. So let's just drive a little bit more safer and keep that all in mind, right? This is Debi Facey with the Canadian Coast to Coast Cannabis News Report. Peace.
It's been another wild week on the stock market, and cannabis stocks continue to plunge. Doug Miller is our man who is high on Wall Street, even though many are still looking to get out of town after another tough week. We know Doug will have some good news for us, hopefully. Here's Doug.
I'm Doug Miller from High on Wall Street with this week's Cannabis Stock Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. The Scott's Miracle Grow Company transferred its cannabis investment unit, the Hawthorne Collective, to an independent strategic partner. Scotch transferred the Hawthorne Collective in exchange for an interest-bearing promissory note. The parent company has the option to reacquire the Hawthorne Collective if marijuana is legalized or other measures that positively impact the industry are approved at the federal level. Scotts did not identify the partner. They stated the separation will be completed by the end of the year. Scott's Miracle Grow Company is trading around $51.19, and it's been pulling back with the market. So let's see if the bottom is near. It's been a very choppy and rough market, so be sure to trade smart, lock in those profits. And that's this week's Cannabis Stock Report. Reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News, I'm Doug Miller.
The race to become the 25th state in the United States to pass adult use sales and legalization of cannabis continues. Many think Pennsylvania is the favorite to make it happen over the next few months, but now Hawaii has advanced a bill that is expanding their medical program. The Senate there passed a bill that allows doctors to recommend medical marijuana for any condition they think will help their patients get help with a number of diagnoses and ailments. Medical program still exists in Virginia, but adult use is all but dead as long as their governor, Glenn Youngkin, is still in charge. Our Virginia correspondent is Joe Parsons. He's counting the days that will end his term this year. Here's Joe with more.
I'm Joe Parsons with the Virginia Cannabis Connection by Higher Education's Coffee Talk, sponsored by 97.5 3WV, and reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. When the governor again vetoed Virginia's cannabis bills this year, lawmakers had hoped that when the session reconvened, they might get enough support to possibly overturn the veto results and get at least one of the bills finally passed through. It was, however, no surprise that they failed to get enough support from the Republican lawmakers. So, as it stands, we'll definitely have to wait for another governor to enact change. That means that our retail market will have to wait until almost 2027. Now, for me, the cannabis resentencing bill was the one that has set the Commonwealth back the most. So I reached out to Tamara L. Netzel, an activist, author, and board member for the Virginia chapter of NORML, for her opinion and which of the bills that failed had the biggest impact for her and which was the worst for Virginia. And here was her response.
So you're right about the retail sales bills. You know, we all knew that that was not going to, that was going to get vetoed, but it was still worth putting it up there. Still worth showing Youngkin, like, hey, this is still something that we pass and we as people believe in, you know. So still makes, you know, it's important that we still put that through, even though we knew it was going to be vetoed. But the one that I really focus on, it really kind of bothers me, is the parental right bill. That is the second year that this legislation has been put through. I understand there were a few changes to improve it even this year. But really, on its face, it's just meant to help people. And so it just really shows the characterization of what our current governor, actually just thinks about cannabis at all. He's just, if it says cannabis, he's just going to veto it. He does not care, and he wants to go against it. Because, you know, I'm actually writing a piece and kind of toying with this, but it does bother me quite a bit. It is a hot issue. And I think that this parental rights, legislation, I think that people might not understand really how intense, unless you've been part of a custody battle or understood, the different sides of a custody battle, it gets pretty intense without cannabis even being introduced, right? Yeah. And what this bill is meant to do is right now with cannabis laws, it's not just one law that you can change and okay, everybody's going to behave a certain way. We have, because of the propaganda for decades, it has been infused and intertwined with so much of the stigma and the way we think about things, anything we do, that the negativity is there. So when it comes to child custody, most of the stories that we've told, many times it's both parents who are consumers, who both consume cannabis. But the one that wants the kid, they'll use the kids as a pawn, and cannabis is still being used as that tool to be able to get their way, right? And what we need to do is this legislation needs to happen so that there is fairness. Right now, there is not fairness. Exes, just because they'll do whatever they can to get custody. And we've actually seen it. Cruel consequences. This is something I'm about to write about. Is we get harassment from exes when we tell stories. I've told several stories about custody battles. They're the only stories that we get harassed by somebody, like the ex who is the story is not being told, wants to censor the story of the ex who we're telling, and they will go at great lengths to harass us just trying to get the story out there. So I can't even imagine what it's like in the custody cases, right? Yeah. Oh, yeah. And how brutal it gets. So that's a piece of legislation I think it's very important because it's intense and people are using it inappropriately.
Pro Cannabis Media and Tamara's organization want to hear your story. So if you want to make your voice heard or have us tell it, even if it's anonymous, please reach out to either www.procannabismedia.com or cruelconsequences.org. We would love to help. Well, that's going to do it for this week from Higher Education's Coffee Talk, sponsored by 97.5 3WV in Charlottesville, and reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Joe Parsons. Until next time, stay lifted.
What's up, everybody? This is Mark Allen, the Chicago clone guy, checking in from just outside of Chicago, Illinois. This is Bird, reported for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Thanks for tuning in. Shout out to Senator Ventura, actually out of Will County, out of Joliet, Illinois, which is actually my county. She has gotten SB 42 advanced through the Senate. Simply put, SB 42 is a repeat. We're going back and forth. I've talked about this before, and I'll talk about it again probably, but this new amendment or new bill from Ventura is going to curb vehicle searches based on the scent of odor, raw or burnt. It would also eliminate the necessary need for cannabis to be in a airproof, sealed container, smell-proof container, which is required now. Side note that marijuana was legalized in Illinois many years ago. After they legalized it for recreational use, just like alcohol, they created this law that allowed them to literally search and arrest us and give us tickets and misdemeanors over not transporting legal marijuana. So they legalized marijuana, but then they made it pretty much illegal to drive around with it if they could smell it. Then they took that law away, and now they brought it back, and now they're trying to take the law away. So if you want to know why Chicago's called the Windy City, you see it's not because it's windy, it's because the politics just go whichever direction the politician wants it to go. So that sums up the news for Illinois for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Mark Allen, Chicago clone guy. This is Bird. Checking out. Thanks for tuning in.
One of the most respected financial analysts in the cannabis industry is Bo Whitney. We've already shared some of their research on the Texas hemp market, but it's the cannabis Delta 9 industry that continues to face the reality of collapse. Now Whitney is downsizing his totals for the future of the industry by 2030 by over $20 billion. That's a lot. Based on the slowed growth of investment, the overregulations, and the new administration's refusal to acknowledge any of the positive gains when the previous administration was in charge. But Whitney thinks the future is bleak. Even a state like Maryland is having its growing pains with a governor who has been a hero of sorts for reform. Here's Christopher Bright with the Maryland Cannabis Report.
Welcome to Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Christopher Bright from The Enlightened Voice, bringing you the latest cannabis headlines from Maryland. Let's get started. Holistic Industries, a licensed cannabis grower in Maryland, has been slapped with a $65,000 fine and 6 months of probation by the Maryland Cannabis Administration. The penalties stem from an investigation launched in February 2024, sparked by an anonymous tip about employee misconduct. Surveillance footage revealed an employee identified as Agent EW repeatedly sneaking sealed cannabis products out of the facility for unauthorized distribution. But that's not all. Investigators found the company failed to keep accurate cleaning and inventory records, neglected proper security measures, and even had obstructed security camera violating state regulations on inventory control and record keeping. Holistic Industries has taken action, firing those involved and hiring new managers and boosting security with a full inventory audit. They also agreed to a corrective plan requiring monthly reports to regulators and advanced training for key staff to keep back on track. The company avoided a full hearing by accepting the fine and probation, but this case underscores the tight oversight in Maryland growing cannabis industry. And now we celebrate our content creator of the week. I would like to shine a spotlight on Sammy Arfin. Sammy is a swing guitarist here in Maryland. Originally from the UK, he has made his home here in Baltimore. He can be seen performing the works of Serge Creef and Django, or just going straight improv on stage. Make sure to follow him on IG at Sammy Make Music and get your tickets today. This has been Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Christopher Bright, reporting from Maryland.
With the hash bash in the history for another year, Amie Carter takes a look at her state of Michigan and a new recycling program that is gaining momentum. Here's Amie.
I'm Amie Carter with Michigan Weedsters for this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News. In a groundbreaking move for environmental sustainability, Michigan regulators are stepping up to tackle vape waste in the cannabis industry. The Cannabis Regulatory Agency is proposing a new initiative that would allow state licensed cannabis businesses to collect and recycle used vape cartridges. But there's a catch. Before recycling, they must ensure that any leftover cannabis concentrate is properly disposed of. So finish your vapes. The CRA Executive Director, Brian Hanna, highlighted the industry's commitment to protecting the planet, stating that these discussions have been in the works for over 2 years. In February alone, Michigan's adult use cannabis market saw over $45 million in sales of vape products, many of which are disposable. With such high numbers, this initiative could significantly reduce environmental impact. The CRA is inviting public feedback on the proposal during a hearing next month, paving the way for a greener future. The Cannabis Regulatory Agency also released a technical bulletin permitting licensees to create compliant packages that include various flavors, colors, and strains of infused edibles and vape cartridges. A multi-pack refers to packaging containing 2 or more different types of the same product, either infused edibles or vape cartridges, packaged together and sold under a single metric tag. This allows licensees to offer multiple varieties of multiple products in one package without having to scan multiple labels. The technical bulletin is available on the CRA website under Bulletin section. Stay tuned as we follow these exciting developments in Michigan's cannabis world. That's it for this week. I'm Amie Carter with Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
That'll do it for the B.Block, but don't go anywhere. PCM TV founder Jimmy Young talks with the founder of MJ Unpacked, George Jage, and previews their next show in Atlantic City, New Jersey at the end of April. Plus, Dina Naguib visits another opening of a cannabis social club in California. Cannabis Coast to Coast News continues after this.